In our previous video, we saw that how HTTP is a stateless protocol and how ViewState and session variables help us to maintain state between request and response. In this video, we'll try to understand the differences between session and ViewState when it comes to state management. Now, before I go ahead and I talk about the difference between session and ViewState, let me put down 8 important points which we need to understand before we come out with the final difference. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll do some theory as well as some demonstrations here, and we'll try to understand each one of these 8 points, and then finally we'll consolidate all these 8 points to understand the full difference between session and ViewState. So in order to demonstrate each one of these 8 points, what I've done is I have created a very simple project here called as the session versus ViewState project, and it has 2 pages here, counter.aspx, and there's one more page called as other page.aspx. Let me first explain you this counter.aspx page here. So if I go to this counter.aspx page here, let me just quickly go to the behind code of counter.aspx page. What I've done here is that I have created a very simple variable here called as a private variable called as _counter. And this counter.aspx, it has 2 buttons here. One is called as the same page button and the other is called as the other page button. So when someone comes and hits this same page button here, what I do is I go ahead and I increment the counter variable. So you can see over here in the button click, right, I'm going and incrementing this counter variable by value 1. And as we all know that this counter variable will not be restored between each request and response. So what I'm doing is that I have created a very simple view state here called as my counter. So before leaving the page control, right, I'm ensuring that I store this value counter into this view state here, and then I display the counter value. And every time when the page loads, right, I ensure that I take the value from the view state and I push it to my local variable so that I get the previous value of my request and response. Okay, so in this way I'm using view state to manage my counter values between each request and response. Right, so if I run this page here, if I go and run this application here, so you can see this 2 buttons here, same page and other page. So if I click on the same page here, right, you can see same page button here, you can see it first shows 1, 2, 3, 4. So in other words, it is using view state to remember the values, and I can see my counter getting incremented in a proper way. Okay, now you can see that I have one more button here called as other page. In this other page, what I'm doing is in this button of other page, what I'm doing is I'm going and redirecting to a other page called as other page.aspx. And in the other page.aspx, I'm trying to go and display that view state here. So you can see this in the page load event of the other page, I'm trying to go and display this view state called as my counter. So the my counter value, which was actually set over here, right, in this page counter.aspx, I'm trying to go and display this value in this other page. Okay, so in other words, now you can see over here my value is 10. So if I go and click on this other page button, right, what I expect is that I expect that this 10 value will be displayed on that page, right? So let me just go and click on that. If you see here, it does not do anything. You can see that there is no value displayed here. Just very quickly, I will just put a debug point here so that we can see what the actual value is. Let me go back here and let me click on this other page. If you go to this view state here, if you do a quick watch, right, you can see the value is null. In simple words, what it means is that view state values are only accessible within the same page. In other words, until I was in counter.aspx, I was getting the value, but the time I went to this other page.aspx, I am no more able to access that value. So let me put down point number 1 for view state. View state values can only be accessed within the same page. The time it goes to the other page, those values are not accessible. Now let me just go ahead and let me make a small change here. Let me just go and change all the view state to session variables. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll say here, do not use view state, use session variable. Also in the other page.aspx, view code over here also I'll say session variable. So now if I click on this same page button here, you can see that how session variable is maintaining data between each postback, right? Now let me go and click on this other page. If I click on this other page, you can see that I can access the session variable value here. So in other words, whatever value was getting set on this page is also accessible on this page. So let me talk about the second point, or let's note down the second point. Session variables, can be accessed across pages. Now let me go back again to my application here, and let's again revert back to ViewState. Okay, so ViewState here, and also on the other page I will use ViewState. Right. And let me run my application. So here's our application running. So let me just go and click on this button, same page, and let me just go and increment to value 5. Now let's go to the page source. So you can see that I have right clicked on the browser, and I'm going to go and click on this view page source. And in this page source, you can see that there is a what you call a name called as ViewState here, and there is some value over here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go and copy this value. Before I copy this value, let me go and open a site here, Control V. Now what I'll do is I'm going to go and copy this value here, which is given in this underscore ViewState what you call hidden field, and let me go and paste this whole thing on this site here, that is ignatu.co.uk/viewstatedecoder.aspx. okay, and let me go and decode this. I'll explain you what exactly I'm trying to do. Now I can see the value actually 5 over here, right? So what it means is that this value 5 gets stored into this hidden field ViewState in the HTML file itself. Okay, and anybody can go and take this value and go and decode this value. Why? Because this value is just base 64 encoded. So in simple words, whenever we use ViewState, the data is stored in hidden fields with the name ViewState, and this data is base 64 encoded. Okay, remember that this is not an encryption, it's an encoded. So now let's add 2 more points to our list. ViewState information is stored in the client side in the hidden fields. And let me add one more point here. ViewState information is base 64 encoded, so it is not safe to store any kind of critical information inside ViewState. In other words, let's say for some reason if I go and store password into ViewState, then anybody can go and do a view source here, take this value and use any such kind of a free decoding site and go and get the values, right? So I have added 2 more points here. First, the ViewState information is stored on the client side inside hidden fields in the ViewState. Okay, and second, the value is base 64 encoded. So in other words, anybody can go and decode that value and see the value. So never store any kind of critical information inside ViewState. Now let me again go back and change this whole thing to session variables. So let me just go and make this session. Session. Right, let me just build this. So there's our application running. So let me just go and increment this value till 4 here. Okay, now let's try to figure out that where does session variable stores its data. If you remember, right, just in a previous part of the video, we said yes, or we figured out that ViewState stores information in hidden fields inside the page itself, right? So where does session variable store data? Now let me make a statement here. When we use session variables, the actual data gets stored on the server. So when we use ViewState, the actual data gets stored on the client side inside the hidden fields inside the inside the browser, right? But when we use session variables, the actual data gets stored on the server. Now the next thing which will come to your mind is that how does the server identify whose data is whose? Because if you remember, right, in the previous video, we have said that session is private to a user. So if the data is getting stored on the server and the server uses the HTTP protocol, so definitely he doesn't know whose data is of whose, right? But ASP.NET has taken care of this. What ASP.NET has done is that for every user he has created a key, and with this key he can identify whose data is of whose. So what the ASP.NET engine does is it stores all the session variables on the server, but then he sends this key to the browser or to the end user who is surfing the site, and this key is stored inside the cookies file. Okay, a cookie is nothing but it's a simple text file which is created created in the browser folder. Okay, so if you go here now, currently I'm using Chrome, right? So if you want to figure out where this key is stored or where the cookie file is, what you can do is you can go to your Chrome browser here and you can go to settings, and let's search here for cookie. There it is. Go to content setting, and let's have a look at all the cookies data which have been created. Now if you go and if you search for localhost, because currently you are searching the site via localhost, currently you are surfing the site via localhost, right? So currently you are using this localhost name here. So if you search this localhost, you can see one cookie created here. And if you go and see this cookie, right, you can see there is a thing called as session ID here. Now this session ID is nothing but, you can see it's a key here, and this key will be used to locate which data belongs to the client. So when this browser makes again a connection to the server, this key is also sent with that request, and then the server sees this key and he says, yes, this is the key and this is the data which belongs to you. So in other words, ViewState stores all the data inside hidden fields in the browser, in the client, okay, in the client machine, while session variable stores all the data on the server, but then one key is sent to the client side which resides in the cookie file, and using this key he can then correlate whose data is of whose. Now the next obvious thing which will come to your mind is that what if the end user goes and disable cookies, because some of the end user, they do not want people to know what kind of sites they surf, right? So sometimes people go and disable their cookies just to maintain their privacy. So what if he goes and disables the cookies? If he goes and disables the cookies, right, then the session variable will not work. Okay, this is the half part of the story. So in other words, if I go here now and if I say that okay, block block all the sites from using cookies, and if I do okay now, okay, and what I'll do is I'll just close this browser here and let me just restart again. So, and now if I go and click on this button here, you can see the value 1 is seen, but if I again go and click, you can see that it is not making it 2, 3, 4 like that. The 1 is seen, why? Because the counter variable 0, it increments +1 and it displays. The 1 will be seen, but you can see that after that 2, 3, 4 are not seen, even though if I'm clicking many times here. So the half part of the story is that if the end user goes and disables his cookies, right, his privacy settings, then the session variables do not function as they are supposed to. So now the next obvious question which will come to your mind is that everybody wants privacy, so you can expect that some people will go and disable the cookies file. So if they go and disable the cookies file, that means the site will start functioning in an abnormal way. For example, over here you can see that when I clicked on the same page, I was expecting a increment in the values, right, but it did not happen. So if a person has disabled his cookie text file or his cookies, right, so how will session variables function then? So for that we have one more methodology here. What we can do is that we can go to our web config file. So we can go here to our web config file. Slow, very slow. So you can go to the web config file, and we have one tag here called as session state. So what we can do is we can say here session state cookieless auto detected. What does it mean? It says that if the browser's cookie is enabled, it is fine, function as you were functioning. But if the browser cookie is not enabled, then please go ahead and ensure that you send this data from the URL. So in other words, now if I go and run this again, there our application is running. Now you can see the first thing which you can easily observe is that the URL has become something different. Okay, why? Because now, as we said that yes, if the client's cookie file is not enabled, please go ahead and send the data via URL. So you can see how the URL has got manipulated. Now if I go and click on the same page, remember that now currently my cookies are disabled. Okay, so you can see 1, then I can see 2, 3. In other words, because the cookies are disabled on the browser, the keys are now passed via the query string. So what happens is, the server reads these keys or the session ID key from the query string, pulls up the appropriate session data from the server and serves it back to the user. So let's note down 2 more important points regarding session variables. First thing, when we use session variables, the data is stored on the server, the actual data. Okay, and the session ID key is stored either in the cookies file, and in case the cookies are disabled, then the keys are actually sent via the query strings. Also, I would like to add one more point here. Because the actual data is now stored on the server, this is more secured as compared to ViewState. If you remember, right, in ViewState, the actual data was getting stored in the browser itself. So anybody can just do a page source. He can go and paste the data on any kind of base 64 decoding tool, and he can see the actual data. So definitely when it comes to critical information, then session variables are much better as compared to ViewState. Also, I would like to add one more point here, that is the 8th point. We can view ViewState as a client-side state management technique, and we can view session variable as a server-side state management technique. So now let's put ahead all these 8 points and let's try to figure out the difference between ViewState and session variables. So the first important point to note here is that when we use ViewState as a state management technique, the data gets stored inside the browser, in form of hidden fields, and this data is passed to and fro from the server to the client. And because the ViewState information is stored inside the hidden fields, so when we browse or when we navigate from one page to other page, the ViewState values are not accessible. And when we use session variables to do state management, right, then the user data or the data actually gets stored on the server, and on the client side in the cookies file, a session ID key is sent, and using this key the lookup is made by the server to get the appropriate user data and send it back to the user. So in other words, session is more of a server side state management technique. Okay, and in case if somebody goes and disables the cookies, then the data is sent via the URLs. And because the data is actually stored on the server and we only have the keys either stored in the cookies file or sent via the URLs, so when you navigate from one web page to other web page, the data is still accessible. So if you put down the comparison, here's what comes up. The first comparison you can do is from the data storage point of view. So if you see the data storage in ViewState, the data is stored in the hidden fields in the browser inside the page, while in session variables the data is stored on the server. This is the first difference. The second is accessibility. Because ViewState stores the data in hidden fields inside the same page, we can only access the data inside the same page. When we use sessions, right, the data gets stored on the server, so we can access session data across pages. Okay, and cookies. ViewState do not use cookies. Actually, it's not applicable at all. But for session variables, they do use cookies. And in case if the cookies are disabled, then the data is sent via the query string, or the key is sent via the query string. So in what scenarios we will use a ViewState, and in what scenarios we will use a session variable? First thing is that whenever it is critical information, if you have some kind of critical information, do not store it using ViewState. I have explained that in the previous part of the video. Always use session variables. That's the first thing. So critical information, session variables. Second, non-critical information like user control data or grid data or something, like the data which is non-critical and you want to maintain between post back and in the same page, then you can use ViewState. So I hope that you enjoyed this video. In this video we were trying to compare how session and ViewState are different and in what scenarios we should use them. Thank you so much. Now whatever video you have seen, right, is just a glimpse of what we have done. So in case you are interested in our video package, you can go to our site, that is www.questpond.com. you can call on this number and you can ask the complete DVD package what we have. So in this DVD package, what we have done is basically we have covered almost everything what a .NET developer wants. So right from basics of ASP.NET, object-oriented programming, SQL Server, to new technologies like WCF, Silverlight, Link, Azure, Entity Framework. We also have UML, architecture, estimation, project management. There is a complete invoicing project end-to-end which is covered, so that you can get a better feel of how to actually create projects in a systematic manner. We have covered server products, both for SharePoint 2007 as well as for 2010. We have a lot of best practices video on SQL Server, etc. So this complete package, you can get from www.questpon.com if you're interested, and you can call on this number and you can ask for the rates. It's a very decent rate what we have. In the same way, as compared to the videos, we also have one more product with us, that is our interview question books. So we have different kinds of interview question books, right from .NET interview questions to SQL Server interview questions, SharePoint interview questions, BizTalk interview questions, etc. So in case you are interested in the books part, you can call on these numbers as per your location. So you can see these numbers on the board at this moment. So I hope that you keep enjoying the videos, you keep seeing our site, and I hope that you gain more knowledge. Thank you very much.